Hi everyone. So my group was assigned TERFs, and I'm going to be going into what that stands for. But just to give a little overview of what we're going to be covering, I'm going to talk about what a TERF stands for. We're going to talk about some current events that are surrounding J.K. Rowling and protests, and then to give a little perspective why people don't like TERFs. And then to conclude, we're going to talk about next steps and what we have learned. On the right, I have two articles where I pulled a lot of the information for the next two slides from. And it's just going to talk about, the rise of anti-trans radical feminists. And then this other one is who actually coined the term. So trans exclusionary radical feminists are the letters that are used in the term TERF. It's a group of feminists that claims that trans women aren't really women, as biological determinism is only a fallacy when it is used against them, not when it is used against others. And just to give a little history on this term and kind of the whole background of this group of radical feminism, in the late 1960s, radical feminism was catching on, and then in the early 1970s, within these groups, women began to divide based off whether they support trans women or not, and those groups kind of used a gender critical title. But then in the early 2000s was when TERF was finally established as a name for that group. It was established by a woman named Viv Smith. She had a blog where she posted a lot about trans women activism, and a lot of people who had a differing opinion than her would comment on her posts, and she finally just gave that group a name, which was TERFs. And so a lot of this does relate back to what we're learning in class right now. The two main things that I took away from this was the concept of intersectionality and also even more broad critical and cultural theories. With intersectionality, it highlights the way cultural identities and inequalities are embedded into political systems and social structures. So a huge part of trans activism is being intersectional, and I think it's clear that TERFs do not have that quality to their group. They're definitely not being intersectional. And then just when we're talking about critical and cultural theories, it's the emphasis of the role that broad cultural institutions and norms play in the construction and maintenance of gender. And I just think that topic is highlighted in this concept because we had this whole cultural wave of transgender, non-binary, and then we have a backlash of groups like TERFs. So that was my section, and I'm going to pass it off to Emily now. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Emily and I'm going to share with you an example of a TERF, and that is J.K. Rowling. Now, just to give some background on J.K. Rowling, she has been tweeting some transphobic tweets for a while now, but up until recently, actually during this quarantine, people have been labeling her a TERF because of her transphobic tweets. And she tweeted recently, "If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth." And this is what a lot of TERFs believe, that trans women are not real women. And they really form their opinions by trans women, by their reproductive organs, and she brings up menstruation in a couple tweets. But yeah, she believes that trans women are not real women, and she also stated in another tweet that trans activism is harming real women, and it's just crazy to me how she doesn't think that she's transphobic or a TERF. But yeah, she is, and this is an example of a TERF. Thank you.
Okay. In other current events news, during the 2018 London Pride Week, a small organization organized an anti-trans protest. Though this was smaller and London Pride had no affiliation with it, it did get following and it did get supporters. A lot of these supporters were from groups called Mayday for Women and Get the L Out, whose main group is to get the L out of LGBTQ. Though London Pride had nothing to do with this protest, they did have to speak out and formally announced that they weren't associated. And the next days during other parades, a lot of people showed support and respect to trans people. Okay.
While some people who are called TERFs say that the word is derogatory, the LGBTQ plus community advocates that those who hold TERF views deny transgender people their full humanity and go against what the medical community today has accepted as the scientific fact around gender and sex. For obvious reason, people have issues with TERFs because they try to use their stance as powerful feminists to then downgrade the trans community. Many TERFs even go so far to claim that the trans community express themselves as transgender just to do it for trendy purposes. Sarah McBride of the National Press Secretary for Human Rights Campaign says that TERF views deny the validity of transgender people and transgender identities. For those of you who don't know, which I'm sure most of you know who this is Daniel Radcliffe. He was Harry Potter in all the Harry Potter movies. He even goes so far to address the situation by saying that transgender women are women. It's clear that we need to do more to support transgender and non-binary people, not invalidate their identities, and not cause further harm.
After researching all the topics listed before on TERFs, we have our conclusion, and we talk about what we have learned and what our next steps are supposed to be in regards to TERFs. So we have learned that TERFs are radical feminists that do not acknowledge trans women as women because according to them, sex is not interchangeable. They often argue that the way you're born is the way you should be. And in this class, we've definitely talked about how sex, like biologically, is male or female, but however, it's a spectrum and it's more on gender and how you express yourself to the public. We've also discovered that there are specific TERF activism groups such as Women's Liberation Front, also known as WOLF, and it has a radical leader. Her name is Julia Beck, and they have publicly opposed the Equality Act and specific trans individuals. Another thing we have also learned is that Wolf also received $15,000 from a religious fundamentalist group that utilizes religion to justify anti-LGBT rights, and it is called the Alliance Defending Freedom. This organization, as stated, is utilizing their religion to exercise their power over certain rights of individuals. And of course, our state, the United States is we emphasize that there's a separation of church and state. And so the Alliance Defending Freedom is definitely imposing their beliefs, their religious beliefs on certain individuals and citizens, which is not okay. And our next steps regarding TERFs include that we need to ensure that we're using words that include trans people and we do not contribute to further opposition. Again, we want to make sure that we are creating an environment that is safe for everyone. We are creating places that are safe for everyone. And so just like our language is a small step that can definitely help us go to a better future and be more inclusive in the future. And lastly, we just want to keep educating yourself and researching about radical activism groups and just staying on top of the media and just doing your research, finding the facts, and staying educated. But that concludes our TERF presentation.